a really busy time of year and a month for everyone for a variety of reasons. So we really appreciate you making the time for us this afternoon. Um, so I do, as we're kind of wrapping up 2025, I want to acknowledge the incredible work that you have done to support families and children in the region of Peel. The time and effort you spent on in your programs and with your staff, ensuring that children are well cared for and engaged is really, really kind of why we do what we do. So thank you so much for that. It really does make a big difference. So I also want to acknowledge that 2025, was a significant transition year for the sector with this, particularly with the introduction of the new funding formula. And collectively, we've learned a lot. We went through a few bumps together. We've had celebrated a few wins together. And as we head into 2026, we're going to bring that experience and that knowledge with us into 2026. So again, thank you very much for, um, being with us on a little bit of a roller coaster ride that was 2025 in this transition year. So thank you. Okay, so yesterday
Olivia,
oh,
Olivia, sorry to interrupt. There are people stuck in the weight room somehow. Can you have a quick look? Thank you so much.
sure, thank you.
Jackie, there's nobody in the lobby, but maybe they can try to leave and re-enter.
All right, I'll let them know. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So, where was I? Oh, right. So yesterday. So yesterday you got an email, and in that email you received our 2026 CWELCC guideline. I know that that guideline had a lot of pages and a lot of information, but please take the time to review the guideline as well as the resources thoroughly. This ensures you're you're prepared and can be compliant with all the requirements of the guideline outlined in 2026. I know it looks like a very long guideline, but I just want to highlight that the spacing is very large, so as well as we build in kind of examples like throughout, just to sometimes highlight a particular point that we're making. So it's the volume there isn't as much as it appears just by looking at the number of pages, right? And that you can use when you're looking at, use the table of contents as your guide to kind of help you with particular topics that you might want to understand or read up on, maybe more than once, just to make sure you understand. After reviewing those guidelines, if you have any questions at all, please do not hesitate to contact and reach out to your early years specialist. They would love to hear from you and talk about 2026 guidelines. Today, we're going to highlight some of the key updates and some of the key next steps and just highlight some of the resources that we've shared. But I just want to remind folks that these teleconferences are meant to complement the guideline, not replace them, right? The guideline is your primary point of reference. Today we're touching upon like the key critical pieces, but all the details that you need are really in the guideline. So before we get started, I just need to kind of do a couple of housekeeping items. So for the folks that might be new to the calls or a change, or just to make sure that everybody knows how to connect with us and what to expect on this teleconference. So first thing is, okay, how do you ask questions? So at the end of the teleconference, there will be, as always, a Q&A section. You can ask question in one of two ways. The first way is you can select that Q&A icon on the top of Teams there. If you don't see it, you might need to click on the More button and then it'll be there if it's not right across the banner. And then you just would type your question in that Ask on the side there. If there is a question that was asked and you're like, oh, I had this question too, you can either thumbs up it or upvote it. That helps us figure out, okay, ooh, a lot of people have questions about this particular topic. So that helps us a little bit in terms of developing maybe resources or supports for the sector. The second way that you can ask questions is by using the raise hand feature. So when we get to that Q&A section of the call, we will kind of do a combination of questions that were asked in the chat as well as people who've raised their hands, and we'll go back and forth. Right, so two ways to ask questions. One is through the Q&A feature. The other one is to raise your hand, and then you unmute and you just ask your question. Now that you are acquainted with the profile, the program, or about answering questions, we'll kind of get into a little bit more housekeeping. So, as usual, this call is being recorded. You staying on this call is your consent to being recorded if you decide to ask a question. Your microphone's going to be muted unless you're called upon them, just to kind of reduce background noise. And we're going to send out a PDF of this of the presentation, shortly as well. Again, if you have a question even after this, you're welcome to send it to the divisional mailbox and/or contact your earlier specialist. Okay, so let's go through today's agenda. So today we're going to cover a couple of key topics. We're going to talk about, okay, what are the updates for CWELCC for 2026, the key guideline changes, how we're going to be doing, allocation changes. Then we're going to talk about the workforce compensation funding because they are specific changes to that program. That's the program that has, the additional dollar. Then there's going to be a wonderful demonstration of the planning tool that you can use to help figure out how much should my staff get paid, right? And that we're going to be doing a demo of that tool that was sent out yesterday. Then there's some key next steps about when you're going to get more information and how we're going to support you going into Q1, and then we're going to turn it over to our question period. Finally, after that too, we're also going to have a survey. It's a quick survey. It's very brief, a few questions, but again, it's just kind of to help us approach how we're going. It's going to help us figure out, again, where do we need to spend more time, or what topics might we need to dive into a little bit more? Where is there an understanding in terms of the providers? Okay, they understand that there, for example, is no change in fees. We can leave that one. Okay, maybe we need to go on to a different topic. So you just responding to that survey will help us figure out where to put our efforts in terms of Q1. So the end development of resources. So thank you. Okay, let's get into it. All right, so 2026 CWELCC updates are effective from Jan 1st to December 31st as 2026. As per usual, around middle of November, we did receive our guideline updates from the Ministry of Education. And now we've reviewed some of those changes and we're able to provide an update on what's new, what is continuing, and also, what are some of the key critical changes that you should be aware of before January 1st. So let's talk about what we sent and why we sent it and what was included. So yesterday you would have received an email from us, and that email had a lot of attachments. So I want to go through, okay, what were all those attachments and what are they for, just to orient you a little bit. So the attachment had three critical had a lot of, they're all critical, but there's three main documents there. There is the CWELCC funding guideline for 2026. For those of you who also operate and provide 6 to 12 programming, we also shared the 2026 school age funding guideline as well. And we also shared the 2026 service provider handbook. So those are three key documents for you. Depending on your program, you might need to read all three or two if you serve school age children or not. Sit down with a nice cup of coffee and a highlighter and read through those at your leisure. The other thing that was included were planning tools. So these tools are meant to help with implementation. So the tools that were included in the email are the staff wage planning tool, which we're going to do a demo of today. Then, based on feedback we received, there was a request to kind of help with workforce innovation funding and planning to use that funds. So we've also included a tool for that as well. And last but not least, the CWELCC operating budget. So that is still, let's say the 2025 version, but just to get you started in January, we wanted to reshare that budget tool. We will be updating it in 2026. But it'll at least get you started at planning out your budget for 2026. Okay, then that wasn't it. And then there's a few more other things. The other things are, so in the guideline, just like last year, we have some communication requirements. We want to communicate about fees to families. So what we've done is we've separated that communication out for you. It's an appendix in the guideline, but we separated it out for you just to make it easier for you to take it and send it out in whatever manner that you normally send out communications to families. Same thing for the memo to staff who are impacted by GO, so any or GOF. So any of your staff who've received GO funding back in 2024, because of that shift in the order in which funds are calculated in order to calculate their wage. We just updated that memo. It's the same one that we sent out last year, just updated for the 2026 numbers. But we've also created that resource for you. You want to share that by, again, January 9th. Then there is a memo to staff as well to let them know about planning time and professional learning funding that's available to them. We're asking that you share that memo to them by the 30th of January. These are all were all given to you as separate attachments in order to help you with sending them out. And last but not least, if you need it as an additional resource, there's a memo for any new staff. So these are the staff who maybe they didn't get GO, or if you're a new center and you never received GO and you just want to let your staff know about a little bit about the wage information and what to expect, there's a memo there that you can use and you can share it as needed. So that's why there were a lot of attachments there. We did translate the attachments in English and French to support any of our French-speaking either families or staff or program staff. So you have the option of either language. But I just wanted to go through, that was what was in the email. And that's why it looked like there were so many attachments, because we wanted to make it easier for you to just forward it as appropriate. Okay, let's get into some of the key changes. So essentially, for 2026, there are no significant CWELCC policy program changes. Yay. We were not in this place last year, so I'm glad that there are not major changes to the program for 2026. Also, the CWELCC fees will not change. They are still so for the most part, not always, but most of you guys are charging, your families are paying $22 a day. That's going to continue. There are a few of you who are charging less than that because that was your rate when it was reduced by 52.75%. And that's the rate that was kind of frozen and continues. But there's no further reduction. There's no change. So whatever you've been doing now, you're just continuing that into 2026. The allocation benchmarks for CWELCC have increased. We're going to get into those as well. The wage enhancement grant ceiling, like the top of the wage enhancement grant, that's increased as well. We'll highlight that. The workforce compensation funding, both the floor and the ceiling, they also went up by $1. We're going to talk about that. That was a change. Then the other one that we wanted to highlight is, so funding allocations and reconciliation for 2026 will occur at the site level or also the license level. So for those of you who are multi-site providers, you might this year you can move money between sites. Like in 2025, we allowed for that exception because this was kind of introduced a little bit later. But we told you that in 2026, you will not be able to move money between sites. So it's a site-specific allocation, and it will be site-specific reconciliation where you could not move money between sites. Okay, next is where are we going? There's some updates, and we're going to share more details about these updates in Q1. So the two areas are that vacancy allowance, right? So that the revenue offset, Right now, the vacancy allowance in 2025 was 10%. Now the vacancy allowance or that gap is 5%. We did not implement that in January. We're going to make all the changes all together at one time. But that is a change for 2026, and more details are going to come about, like with examples of calculations and things in Q1. The second thing that is a key update from an allocation perspective is so legacy and growth top-ups from 2025 are then going to be become what EDUs called the rolling top-up in 2026. There's another slide where we get into that a little bit more. Those are the two key updates. So one is that your allowable vacancy is kind of decreasing. The thought behind this is to really encourage folks to operate at their maximum of operating capacity. Not like, there's going to be a little bit of, turnover while, little Billy leaves and little Cindy comes in, but we're hoping to keep that. The goal is to try to keep that as small as possible to give access to the program to as many children as possible. So that's why the vacancy allowance has decreased. And the rolling top up is also something that's going to be calculated based on actuals, and we'll get into a little bit more details about that one in an upcoming slide. Okay, so let's talk about fees. So again, just to clarify, there are no changes in CWELCC fees for 2026. Fees must continue to be the lesser of $22 a day or whatever it was, whatever your CWELCC reduced fee was back in December 31st of 2024. So that's when it was like the 52.75% discount. If though, excuse me, if you join CWELCC after December 31st, so in 2025, that's where the regulation kicks in. Again, you're capped at $22 a day for the most part. Infant, toddler, preschool, family age group, $22 a day for any full day kindergarten program. So like, let's say you offer a PA day program, again, that cap is $22 a day. And then also the cap is $13.35 a day for any kindergarten program. So that's AM, PM, or AM and PM. These are if they were kind of, pre-existing that you're wrapping around the school day. So AM is like before, PM is after, and your AM, PM is your before and after school program. Different ways of calling it, but that is what it means. And the cap there is $13.35. Okay. Next is now let's talk about like your funding for 2026 and what to expect. So you've already seen it because I think it was live as of December the 8th. You would have already seen your January 1st Gov grants allocation for the 2026. So for the most part, there was no changes. We just essentially rolled over your 2025 funding into 2026. So everything including legacy and growth top-up amounts should be the same. The only change that we did make is, again, if you opened up a new site or new spaces in 2025, we were sure to update your allocation to reflect like 12 your regular operating months for the year, so 12 months a year. So as an example, if you opened up in September, your 2025 allocation would have been for 4 months. What we would have done is made it for 12 months. And that is really the main change that was made. We will be making like a bunch of changes aimed at to be implemented in April. And that's what you'll see on the gray side of the box there. So you're going to see the increased benchmarks, which we're going to get into. We're going to be updating our data, with any license capacity changes. We're going to be looking at any significant changes to your operating capacity. Thank you very much for reporting in OCCMS. Please continue to do so monthly. And at that point, we're going to change the base fee revenue offset to from 10%, we're going to reduce it to 5% as per EDU's guideline. But all those changes will be made at one time in April. Okay, so let's talk about some of the benchmark increases for 2023. So we do have an appendix that you'll see when we share the PDF of the guideline that goes through all the individual benchmarks for each of the age groups and the different settings. So we have all the detail, but we want to create a bit of a summary for today, for today's call. So overall, I would say the benchmarks increased by about 2%. And you'll see on the slide there, some maybe are 1.8, some are 2.1, right? But overall, it was a 2% increase. Then you can see on the slide that for program staff, depending on the age group, the benchmarks increase between 5.9 and 9.6% for program staff and 8.9% for supervisors. So this is where the increases to the ceilings and the work floor are kind of embedded in these increases here, which are a little bit higher, obviously, than the regular, let's say 2% cost of living or inflationary increases. Okay. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about, for those of you who receive legacy or growth top up, or we're just going to talk a little bit about how your rolling top up is going to be determined. So the province does require us to convert those two into the legacy and growth top-ups into the rolling top-up for 2026. So in order to calculate the rolling top-up, we will use your actual expenses. So these are your actual kind of reconciled expenses. Once calculated, then the rolling top-up ratio will become like a permanent ratio that gets applied to the benchmarks. And I just want to clarify that, when the reason that the ratio is used, it's a good thing, is what it does is it ensures that if you did receive legacy, when benchmarks go up, that legacy part amount doesn't go down, right? Right. It also it grows as much or this using that same percentage. So it helps you maintain your cost structure by it being calculated as a ratio. So you won't lose. When we do the benchmarks in April, it doesn't mean that your legacy is going to go down or your growth is going to go down, right? They both are going to kind of go up at that point at the same level. However, when we do your rolling top up, that one is really calculated again on actual expenses. And then that means that, if your reconciled actual expenses are less than your total allocation, that will mean that your rolling top-up amount will be less than your legacy amount. That was a question that was asked at a reconciliation teleconference, so we did want to clarify that now. In Q1, we're going to give you more details about, again, the math about how the rolling top-up is calculated and walk you through some scenarios, well, what happens if I'm lower, what happens if I'm higher, and those things. So we're going to go into those in detail in Q1. But for today, we wanted to just introduce the concept so that you kind of get an understanding about what to expect a little bit. We're also going to share about the timelines for implementation of the rolling top-up for those of you who are received, let's say, legacy or growth top-ups in 2025. So with that, I'm going to pass it along to Debbie, and she's going to take us through the workforce compensation funding section.
Thank you so much, Olivia. And so, hi, everyone. My name is Debbie Berju. I am an advisor with the Childcare Policy and Funding Development team, and I'm happy to take you through the workforce compensation slides for 2026. So, as Olivia said, for 2026, there are no major policy changes, and this also applies to the workforce grants for 2026. No major policy changes, but there are some important updates to the wage caps and the wage floors that you need to be aware of. And so the slides here shows what the enhancement amount is for WAG and WCF, as well as the new wage ceilings and wage floors. And for the most part, the ceilings have been increased by $1 each, and same as the wage floor. They all went up by $1 an hour for 2026. What's important on this slide is the WCF annual increase will increase from $3 in 2025 to $4 an hour in 2026. And in order to be eligible for that increase, staff do need to be working at below the ceiling. The wage floor amount, so for RECEs in 2026, they cannot earn less than $25.86 an hour, and for RECE supervisors, they cannot earn less than $26.86 an hour, and that's inclusive of all grants. So now that we've covered the wage caps and floors, let's review the steps for determining the wage grants in 2026. And the steps that you're seeing on the slide is the same as they were for 2025. And so you'll recall that at the start of this year, so as of January 1st, 2025, the Ministry of Education told us that the general operating funding must be incorporated into base wages first before we apply WEG and WCF. Prior to 2025, this was applied last, so that is where the change comes in. And so this order of operations that you're seeing on the screen, it is what we've done for 2025, and it will continue into 2026. And as a reminder, that GOF amount that you're seeing, that GOF column, it does include the staff wages and benefits amounts of the SWB amount, historical, and pay equity. So in terms of calculating staff wages for 2026, just as a reminder, it starts off with the staff base wage. And so for 2026, this will be the amount that's paid by the employer as of December 31st, 2025. And so that includes any employer base wage improvements that staff would have received this year, such as obligations from collective agreements or cost of living increases, as well as staff who would have earned that bump up in October due to the minimum wage increase in 2025. And so that's the first step. You start with the base wage and and this is how you determine the base wage. The second step is to apply the GOF. And so like I mentioned, GOF includes SWB, historical, and pay equity, and the amount per hour here should be the same as what that staff received in 2024. And that staff should have received the same per hour amount in 2025, and so that continues into 2026. So for instance, if a staff received $3 an hour for GOF in 2024, they should continue to receive that $3 an hour for GOF in 2025 and in 2026. If your program did not exist in 2024 or you do not receive GOF, you can just skip this step. The third step is to add the WEG. And so WEG is $2 an hour. It's always been $2 an hour. However, the wage cap did increase by $1. It is now $33.81 per hour. So if staff earns less than that cap, they would be eligible for up to $2 up to that cap. Once you've done that, the fourth step is to apply the WCF. As I mentioned, for 2026, this is $4 an hour per the provincial communication. It is the final year for this $1 an hour increase, and so it is $4 in 2026. And so staff earning below the wage ceiling would be eligible for this $4 an hour up to the ceiling. For program staff, that is $28 an hour, and for supervisors, it is $31 an hour for 2026. And the final step is applying the wage floor. And so if after you've calculated the staff hourly wages inclusive of GOF, WEG, and WCF, program staff are earning below the wage floor or supervisors, you would need to bring them up to the wage floor. And as I mentioned, program staff who are RECEs cannot earn less than $25.86, and supervisors who are RECs cannot earn less than the $26.86. And in the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the wage stability policy. So let's move on. So now that we've reviewed the wage caps and floors and the order of operations, just a few reminders. And again, these are not changes for 2026, they're just reminders. And so as I mentioned, just an additional $1 an hour for the wage compensation amount in 2026, bringing you up to $4. However, what's really important to know is that some staff may not be eligible to receive that additional dollar because of the change in GOF order of operations that was implemented in 2025. And even though EDU made this change, what they did say is that staff should not receive less than they did in 2024. And that policy, which we call our wage stability policy, it continues into 2026. And so essentially, whether or not your staff receives that additional dollar will depend on what their base wage is and how much general operating funding they're receiving. And so that wage stability policy that I mentioned really ensures that at a minimum, staff should receive a wage that is no less than what they got in 2024. So for instance, if a staff was working in an eligible position, and that staff was eligible for all of these grants. And on December 31st, 2024, that staff was earning $28.50. Once you've added all of the wage grants, that is the amount that that staff must be held at in future years. So for instance, if you were to use the wage tool and apply all of the grants for the staff, and that staff hourly wage was $28, you would need to give that staff the additional $50, 50 cents through the wage stability policy in order to keep that staff at their 2024 levels. And the wage tool will do all of that for you. So we strongly encourage you to use the staff wage planning tool to help you calculate the correct wage amounts for staff. It'll do all of the math for you, and it'll help you determine exactly what staff should be receiving. And as Olivia mentioned, you should have received that tool as part of the CWELCC guideline package that we shared yesterday. And then finally, the other reminder is pay stub notations. So these requirements have not changed. Again, they continue to remain the same in 2026 as they were in 2025. And so on staff pay stubs, you should be separating out the dollar amount that staff receives for CWELCC, so WCF, for GOF. And again, that is the SWB historical and pay equity amount, and for WAG. And so those amounts should be listed out separately on pay stubs. If you need help with any of these calculations, again, go to the tool. And if you have questions about the tool, please reach out to your EYS. I'll now hand it over to Salma to walk you through an example of how all of this comes together using the tool that we shared yesterday. So thank you so much. Over to you, Salma. So Salma, if you're speaking, you're just on mute, okay? So you will need to unmute.
Oh my gosh, sorry about that. Thanks, Debbie. Hi, everyone. My name is Salma, and I am a senior program funding analyst at the region of Peel. Today, I'll be walking you through the 2026 workforce compensation planning tool that we've created. And the purpose of this tool, once again, is to help providers in determining the appropriate hourly wage for their staff. Please note, if you are an existing provider, you would have seen this tool in prior years. And as Debbie mentioned, there have been no major changes made to policies, with the exception of just updating the wage floor and ceiling to align with 2026 numbers. So with that being said, we'll get started. So the first tab we have here is the instructions tab for your reference. On this tab, you will find details on the type of staff who qualify for WCF and an overview of each column that you will be seeing on the next tab, with a brief instructions on what to input into each column if there are any inputs required. So please ensure to thoroughly read through this tab before moving on to the next tab, as it will maybe help answer most of your questions before you start with your inputs. Next, we have the planning tool itself. And similar to many of our other templates, you are required to provide inputs in all the green cells. The white cells on this tab will be automatically calculated for you, so you just need to input items into the green cells. So we'll start with an example that we have here. Let's assume we have staff member SD who serves CWELCC eligible children, is an RECE, and a program staff. Next, in column G, we're going to assume that their estimated program hours worked for the period of January 1st to December 31st, 2026 is 1,500 hours. Next, we have column H, which is asking you to input what your staff SD was earning an hourly wage as of December 31st, 2024, making sure that you include all grants and enhancements. Please do not include any top-up amounts. Let's assume in this example that staff member SD was earning $25.86 per hour, which includes all their grants and enhancements. Column I is then asking you to input what your staff was earning in hourly wage as of December 31st, 2025, before applying any grants or enhancements. And in this case, we're going to assume the minimum wage of $17.60. Moving on in column J, if this staff member was eligible for any hourly pay equity, at this point you would enter that amount here. For the purpose of this example, we will assume $0 in pay equity. And finally, you will enter the amount of GOF, SWB, and any historical allocation for this staff member. In this case, we are assuming $2. As you'll notice, we are now done with all the green provider inputs. As we move along the tool, you will notice that WEG is automatically calculated in column N, with each staff being eligible for up to $2 an hour if they are below the WEG cap of $33.81. Once again, this is automatically calculated and applied for you. Since this staff member is below the cap, they will receive the $2 per hour in WEG, bringing her subtotal in column O to $21.60. Now, as Debbie mentioned, the wage increase for 2026 is going to be up to $4 an hour for each eligible staff member. Because the staff was currently earning less than the wage ceiling of $28 an hour for an REC program staff, they will be entitled to the full $4 of wage increase, bringing them to a subtotal of $25.60 per hour. After the wage increase is applied, staff member SD is still earning below the wage floor of $25.86 an hour for RECE program staff. Therefore, in column R, they will receive an additional 26 cents for wage floor, bringing them to an hourly wage of $25.86. Now, if you remember earlier, in column H, we noted that the staff member was earning $25.86 as of December 31st, 2024, after all their grants and enhancements were applied. Going back, column T, wage stability, will calculate the difference between the 2024 hourly wage of $25.86 and the projected hourly wage of $25.86. Because in this example, the 2026 hourly wage is the same as the 2024 hourly wage, there is no additional wage stability amount calculated or required. Column U is going to calculate what each staff member's final hourly wage should be in 2026, and it's simply taking the higher of column H, which once again is the 2024 hourly wage with enhancements, and column S, which is the 2026 hourly wage with enhancements. We have also included the staffing cost projection in column V, should you want to anticipate your staffing cost, excluding the benefit portion for the year. And lastly, we have included a pay stub reporting section within columns X, Y, and Z to help facilitate and ease your reporting for your pay stub notations, which include WEG, GOF, and CWELCC. Now we will look at another example where wage stability comes into play. Let's assume we have staff member AB, who also serves CWELCC eligible children and who is an RECE program staff. Let's also assume that their estimated program hours worked for the period of January 1st to December 31st, 2026 is 1,500 hours. Now, once again, column H asks you to input what the staff was earning an hourly wage as of December 31st, 2024, inclusive of all grants and enhancements. So in this case, let's assume staff member AB was earning $28.50 per hour. Next, we will enter in staff member AB's base wage per hour as of December 31st, 2025, before any grants or enhancements. And in this case, let's assume they were earning $22.50. Once again, for the purpose of this example, we will assume that they are earning $0 in hourly pay equity. And in this case, we're going to assume that they are earning $3 for GOF, SWB, and historical allocation. Now that we are done with the provider inputs, let's see what this Excel sheet has calculated. So because staff member AB is below the WEG cap of $33.81, you will see that the automatic $2 an hour on WEG is calculated, bringing their subtotal to $27.50 an hour. Now, once again, the wage increase for 2026 is up to $4 an hour for each eligible staff member. Because staff AB is currently earning less than the wage ceiling of $28 an hour for our ECU program staff, they will be entitled to an additional 50 cents of wage increase, bringing them to a subtotal of $28. After the wage increase is applied, staff member AB is earning the wage floor of $28 an hour for an RECU program staff. Therefore, as you see here, they will not be earning any amount in 2026 wage floor column R. Now, AB's hourly wage in 2026 is $28 an hour. If we go back to column H, you'll remember that as of December 31st, 2024, they were earning $28.50 an hour, which was inclusive of all grants and enhancements. Going back to the wage stability column that we talked about earlier, column T will calculate the difference between the 2024 hourly wage of $28.50 and the current projected hourly wage of $28 in 2026. Because their 2026 hourly wage is lower than the 2024 hourly wage, an additional 50 cents of wage stability will be automatically calculated and applied in column T. And you will just go ahead and enter in all your staff onto this Excel sheet to help you calculate each staff member's hourly wage. And with that, I will pass it on to Mark.
Thank you, Salma. And hi, everyone. My name is Mark York, and I'm an advisor in the Childcare Policy and Funding Development team in the Early Years and Childcare Division, and I'll be walking you through the rest of the presentation here today. So I do recognize that the information that you have received is a lot, and we want to ensure that everyone understands the actions required related to your funding, which is why we're hosting another teleconference in the new year to go in a bit more detail, as well as to respond to any of your questions that you may have. All right, so as we move on to next steps, let's just go over a few things. So your 2026 funding allocation should be visible in GovGrants as of December the 8th. So please have a look. We really encourage that you stay on top of your operating budget throughout the year. Make sure that you have your regular check-ins with your EYS to ensure that you remain on track financially. And don't forget about the updated 2026 staff wages tool. It is very important to use it because it will help you calculate staff wages with all the new 2026 WEG and WCF floor and ceiling amounts. Most of these resources and tools should have already hit your inbox. And so if you haven't received them as of yet, feel free to connect with your EYS and they should be able to sort everything out for you. In addition to that, we are working closely with our digital team to get everything posted on our website to ensure that you have easy access to these resources and tools. Other reminders, there's an update task in GovGrants that is due back mid-January, as well as in January/early February, you'll be expected to complete the workforce update task in GovGrants. And lastly, again, our teleconference is scheduled for January 2026. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to message your EYS as well as email us at the Early Years Division inbox account. So now let's move on to some questions. All right, so thank you for submitting your questions through the Q&A function. If you have raised your hand, I will call on you to unmute and ask your questions directly. We will compile all questions from today's session and share the responses with you afterwards. And as well, always, feel free to reach out to your EYS or contact us directly for additional support.